Well, as you can see here, the weather has turned cold and it's snowing here in the Midwest. So I'm going to try something a little different and see how you like it. I'm going to have an overall discussion about a vehicle, and in a format that I talk about some information that I know, show some video clips, some pictures, and talk about the history of a car without exactly having one present. So thankfully, before all of this messy snow started, I shot a number of full reviews of vehicles that I just need to edit and have the time to do that. But thought I'd try this, and as an introductory discussion, we will have a conversation about the beloved Cadillac Cimarron, everybody's favorite vehicle from General Motors in the 80s. Now, before you groan and moan and say that that's not a Cadillac, it was a Cadillac. It was a Cimarron by Cadillac. And we're going to talk about the design, how it came to be, some of the interesting features of the car, some of the challenges, why it didn't have the success that maybe it originally was thought that it was going to have, and overall just have some fun discussing. So get your cup of coffee or adult beverage or whatever you like, sit back, relax, and enjoy. All right, let's get into it. So the Cimarron was an interesting vehicle for General Motors and Cadillac in particular. It was introduced in 1982 and ran until the 1988 model year. And I think the first thing to really understand about the car was that it at first was never designed to be off of the J-Car platform, which was the platform that the Cavalier, the J2000 or subsequently Sunbird, the Olds Forenza, and the Buick Skyhawk came off of. So the Cimarron was originally intended to be off of the X-Car platform, which was the same platform that the Chevrolet Citation, Pontiac Phoenix, Olds Omega, and Buick Skylark came off of, which was about 4 to 5 inches longer in length, 3 inches bigger in width than the J-Car that it came off of. So it really got downsized kind of late in the program, from what I understand, because of production constraints and capacity constraints. Remember that the X-Car at the time, when it was introduced in 1980, Chevrolet was selling out of those. They sold 800,000 Citations, 800,000 in the 1980 model year. And albeit that was an extended model year, but still a tremendous, tremendous production volume for that car. And consequently, there just wasn't any place for production for a Cimarron to come off of that platform. So it switched from the X-Car to the J-Car. And it was a program that famously, when it switched to the J-Car platform, the general manager of Cadillac was told by the president of the company that he really didn't have enough time to make a Cavalier into a Cadillac. And that's probably true, because for 1982, when the vehicle was introduced, it really didn't have too many differentiating features versus a Cavalier. But bear in mind, a Cavalier's base price was around $7,000 at the time, and the Cimarron's base price in 1982 was $12,200. And it doesn't matter what J-Car variant you look at, the Cavalier, the J2000, the Forenza, or the Skyhawk. The Skyhawk was the most expensive in terms of base price at about $7,600. And all of the J-Cars by this time, GM really had an issue, because when they had the 5 divisions to start, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Olds, Buick, Cadillac, back in the 50s and 60s, the base price differentiation between them was pretty substantial. So you take a Chevrolet base price, and then the Pontiac premium versus the Chevrolet was 10 to 15%. The Olds premium versus the Pontiac was 10 to 15%. The Buick versus the Olds was 10 to 15%. So the Olds base price premium back in the 50s and 60s was almost 30–40% more than the Chevrolet. And by the 80s, all the dealer networks were trying to compete on top of one another and compete for the same buyer. And so that base price differential kept shrinking and shrinking, to the point that in the 80s it was really only about 5 to 10% at most in terms of base price differential between a Chevrolet and some other division. So I just told you the Cavalier's base price was, I think, just sub 7,000 at 6,900. And the Skyhawk, which would have been the most premium aside from the Cimarron off the J-Car platform, was $7,500, $7,600. So really just about a 10% price premium between the cheapest and the most expensive, again, outside of the Cimarron. So imagine you have this really tight band of base prices, and then ranging from 7,000 to 7,500. And then you take the Cimarron at $12,200 almost. It just was an astronomical premium over any other J car. And the car was launched with a 1.8 liter four-cylinder, which really was kind of a parts bin engine that used parts from many different engines. It was 88 horsepower. There was no V6 engine that was optional at that time, not until 1985. And the car, Motor Week tested it, and other magazines tested it. It took about 16 seconds to go 0 to 60. So here you are, you're developing a BMW Audi fighter, something that should just be, have a little bit of spunk to it. And you develop something with an 88 horsepower four-cylinder that takes 16 seconds to go 0 to 60. Not all that compelling. So much so that after 1 year, they introduced, can you see this? A new 2-liter 5-speed manual engine and transmission for 1983. So that 1.8 liter was just so lackluster that the motor got enlarged by 0.2 liters to a 2-liter engine. Same horsepower in 1983, by the way, so still 88 horsepower, but about 10% more torque. And the magazines tested it at the time, and the car went from being, call it a 16-second car, 0 to 60, to about a 14-second car, 0 to 60. And they raved about that. I mean, it still was tortoise, like slow. But it was better than the car that came before it. So, again, for $12,000, what did you get? The only thing in the first year that they really were able to change was the sheet molded compound, or that front area in front of the hood. They changed that area, so put a little bit different grille treatment, headlights. In the back, you'll notice that the cutout for the Cimarron taillight is the same as the Cavalier. But they changed the taillight shape, put a up-level interior in it, although it still used the J-Car dashboard. The Cadillac Cimarron interior the dashboard is essentially the same as the Cavalier, aside from some minor gauge treatment differences. So all it was really different door panels, different seats, a little bit different gauges, a little bit different front, purely the fiberglass portion or the sheet molded compound portion, and then the back with some of the tail lights. And that was it. That was what you got for paying $12,000 as opposed to $7,000. And by the way, the base price of a Chevrolet Caprice in 1982 was in the $8,000, $8,500 range. So you're paying $12,000 for a Cimarron. You could get clearly a very different car, but you could get a Chevrolet Caprice for something that was much, much cheaper. Now, consequently, the car didn't really sell all that well in terms of the volume. It sold about 25,000 units the first year, never really got above that. In its final year in 1988, I think it only sold about 7,000 units. So the production figures ramped down over time, and as is typical with most General Motors vehicles, they tend to get it right the last year and they cancel the car. So by the last year, it did have a V6 that was optional, and at about 125 horsepower, which was a big premium, almost a 50% premium over the four-cylinder in terms of horsepower. And I have never owned a Cimarron, but I've driven a V6 one, a really nice one that was for sale with low mileage, and it was a very pleasant car. I will say I didn't find the ride and refinement as good as the X cars. I think the X cars actually had not only better room inside, which you just get by the fact that they were wider and larger than the J cars and longer, but the they were more refined too. I actually have some internal GM documents from the time that suggest they were trying to improve the J-car pleasability with some interesting and innovative solutions to the motor compartment and the mounting system, and they basically ran out of time. So those didn't make it to production, and consequently, especially with that buzzy 1.8 liter four-cylinder, it just wasn't all that pleasant. But you know, I think when you go back and think about what had to be done to turn a Cavalier into a Cadillac, and what would you think if you were doing that work? So from the design standpoint, the task fell to an individual named John Manoogian, who was part of Wayne Cady's studio at Cadillac. And Wayne Cady, before I say this, let me say I know Wayne decently well, and number one, he's a human being and has feelings, so be careful in the comments. And number two, I think he's actually a pretty talented designer, but Wayne is the individual who designed the Bustleback Seville. That was kind of his, I'll say, signature design, but also led the design. He was head of Cadillac Studio in the 70s and in the 80s, so he led the design of the 71 Eldorado. And he then went to Buick Studio for a few years, where he was responsible for de-boat-tailing the Riviera from the 73 boat tail to the 74, 5, etc., with the different rear end, as well as the 75 Electra front end. And then he went back to Cadillac Studio, and he was Cadillac Studio chief until, I believe, the late 80s-ish, when he went to Buick again. But so Wayne was the studio chief of Cadillac at the time, and John Manoogian was the actual designer on the vehicle. And actually, even John Cafaro, who just recently retired from General Motors, was also on the design team, from what I understand. And you can see them in this video clip here. You can see both John Manoogian and John Cafaro. So John Manoogian was famous for some other vehicles in the General Motors lineup, including the early 90s Bonneville, the 2007 Cadillac CTS. He also did that mid-2000s Impala, which was not necessarily my favorite, but ended up selling well. In any event, John ended up being the Cadillac exterior studio director and did a number of the Cadillacs, like that 2007 CTS, the sedan, the coupe, the wagon, that all looked really, I think, actually were some of the best looking Cadillacs of the time. And so John Manoogian is a very talented designer, and some of the sketches that his team came up with for the Cimarron were rather radical for the time period. Unfortunately, none of them really made it into production, as Cadillac tried to rush this car out the door and was forced to use the J-car in pretty much as it was format to base the Cimarron off of. And there were a number of reasons for that. The dealer body was clamoring for a vehicle that could compete against Mercedes and against BMW and Audi. Dealers were threatening to leave, add cross-brand showrooms. They wanted something ASAP. And Cadillac, you have to remember at the time, Cadillac had quite a bit of success with the first Seville, the 76 to 79 Seville, in essence taking what was a Chevrolet Nova platform, at the time X platform, and redoing it and making it a K car. It was actually the K designation. So there was some precedent for taking a relatively low-level vehicle and making it a premium car. In that case, the Seville, the 76 to 9 Seville, the base price of the Seville was higher than any other Cadillac in the lineup, aside from the Fleetwood 75 limousine. So there was some precedent, again, to say that this could be done. And yet with the Cimarron, it just was too little too late, really, for the 1982 model year. And as I mentioned, each year that they stepped through the vehicles, each year that the vehicle progressed, different revisions were added, new powertrains were added. It got kind of better every year. They even added an electronic dashboard after a few years, which I'm sure everybody really wanted, and Bose, Delco Bose radios, I think in 1983 or 84. for the car. So it did get a number of interesting features, but really what doomed it, number one, the accelerated timeline to get the vehicle out the door. Number two, changing from the X car to the J car, making it pretty small. Just the overall small package. Number three, the base price, putting it at $12,000 plus base price versus every other J car in the $7,000 to $7,500 base price range. Number four, really not differentiating it that much because of the rush that had to occur to get it out the door. Number five, the engines will say to start, the 1.8 liter engine just being a parts bin motor that was thrown together by Chevrolet division. It was a really bad motor. It actually ended up being halfway decent. It went from 1.8 to 2 liter to 2.2 liter in its final form, and in the final years in the Cavalier. It actually was pretty reliable, decently peppy. I've driven a number of them in Cavaliers, and they're surprisingly refined for a pushrod overhead valve basic engine. But nonetheless, back then it was woefully inadequate in power, to the point where in the first year, the 1.8 liter four-cylinder, the passing time from 40 to 55, according to Motor Week, was 7.5 seconds to go from 40 miles an hour to 55 miles an hour. And it took 22 seconds to go from 0 to 65. 22 seconds. That is slow. I mean, you might as well Fred Flintstone it and pedal faster. And I think also just consequently some of the marketing, Cadillac was a bit gun-shy of calling this a Cadillac. And you see that in the badging where it says Cimarron by Cadillac. And there's a late 80s Cadillac advertisement, I think it's 87 or 88, where they're talking about the whole Cadillac lineup, showing off the new Cadillac jingle, the Cadillac style jingle. And the Cimarron is in that video. It's a 1 minute long video. Cimarron's there for about 2 seconds behind some trees while all the other Cadillacs are front and center. So I think a number of things really just caused it to be a challenge. And, you know, Cadillac, that car, they really never have been able to live that down. Jay Leno even was interviewing Ed Welburn, the then vice president of design for GM, about the El Mirage concept. And Jay was commenting on how Cadillac has come so far and they've done so much. And he mentions the Cimarron. And you can watch Ed Welburn's face just gasp when Jay mentions that. He just goes, and takes a step back, almost as though he couldn't believe that Jay Leno said that and referenced the car. So it did quite a bit of damage to Cadillac for a long period of time. And, you know, unfortunately, I think, for me, Cadillac always stood for luxury and luxury vehicles. And yeah, I don't know that the current vehicles achieve that. They're very performance oriented. It's kind of like Cadillac, the ultimate driving machine. And they're not my cup of tea. They may be other people's, and they're good cars. They perform very well. Obviously, they're going all electric. But you know, I certainly miss the Cadillacs, particularly of the 60s era. I think that was really the heyday for Cadillac in that late 50s. You could even say from 1949, the sedanette coupe, to probably 67, 68, probably the best days for Cadillac. Albeit they did come out with a number of interesting designs, but there was always some mechanical issue, I think, that really bogged Cadillac down after that time period, whether it was the introduction of the diesel engine in 1978, or the introduction of the V8 6.4 engine in 1981, or the 4.1 liter HT40 100 engine in 1982, each of which we can go into more in detail in other videos. But Cadillac really just had a series of mechanical issues that I think was a big challenge for them to overcome, and stuck with them for a long time. One could even say that the Northstar engine, when it was introduced in 1993, wonderful running engine. I actually have one as my daily driver. But it from a reliability and maintenance standpoint, was somewhat challenging, shall we say. So it's been a challenge for Cadillac, I think, for some time. And I hope, with the new electric vehicles, they get some of the mojo back. But in any event, hope you enjoyed that brief discussion of the Cimarron and why it maybe didn't pan out as GM had thought. Let me know what you think about these style chat videos, and I'll try to do more as the winter progresses here. It won't be as easy to do road tests. Thankfully, as I said, I filmed a number before the weather has turned, but hopefully this was enjoyable. Thanks for watching. Hey, my name's Adam. Welcome to my Rare Classic Car channel. If you enjoy... Hey, my name's Adam. Welcome to my Rare Classic Car channel. If you enjoy classic American vehicles of the 50s to, let's say even 90s now, that you don't see on the road anymore, please like and subscribe to the video that you've just seen and to my channel. About 80% of you are not yet subscribed, so what are you waiting for? Click the circle that you see here to subscribe, and then hit the bell to make sure that you get notified of all my latest videos. Really appreciate you watching, and thanks again. Take care.